Bet you can't hit one, old man." The voice was a cocktail of cheap cologne and unearned confidence, slicing through the cheerful din of the county fair. It belonged to a young man named Brody, who stood with his chest puffed out like a pouter pigeon, basking in the giggles of his friends. He'd just managed to knock down 3 of the 5 swinging metal ducks in the rigged shooting gallery, a feat he treated as a testament to his innate superiority. The object of his condescension was an elderly man standing quietly to the side, his hands resting gently on the railing. The old man's face was a road map of long years, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to look at the world from a great distance. He wore a faded flannel shirt, softened by 1,000 washings, and a pair of worn denim jeans. Everything about him screamed ordinary, forgettable. He was a ghost at the feast, a black-and-white photograph in a world of screaming digital color. Brody, mistaking silence for weakness, pushed his advantage. "I'm talking to you, Grandpa. You look like you might have held a rifle back in the Stone Age. Want to give it a shot? Or are your hands too shaky?" He gestured mockingly at the old man's left hand, which bore a slight, almost imperceptible tremor, the kind that comes with age or too much coffee. The old man didn't answer. His gaze remained on the little metal ducks, resetting on their mechanical track with a series of metallic clicks and whirs. A few yards away, a man named David watched the exchange with a growing sense of irritation. He was here with his wife and son, trying to enjoy a rare day off, but the casual cruelty of the young man grated on him. David had done 2 tours with the Marines. He knew the look of real strength, and it had nothing to do with loud voices or flashy clothes. He glanced at the old man, initially feeling a pang of pity. He looked frail, lost. David was about to step in to tell the kid to back off and show some respect when he saw it. It was a small detail, almost invisible. Beneath the frayed cuff of the old man's flannel shirt, just visible on the weathered skin of his forearm, was a tattoo. It was faded to a blurry sea-green smudge, but David's trained eye could just make out the shape. A skull, superimposed over a spade, with a pair of crossed arrows behind it. His breath caught in his chest. It couldn't be. That was the insignia for MACV-SOG, the highly classified, multi-service special operations unit that ran Black Ops in the Vietnam War. They were legends, ghosts who did the impossible and were never acknowledged. David's entire posture changed. He was no longer a civilian enjoying the fair. He was an observer, a witness. He watched the old man, not with pity, but with a sudden, dawning reverence. The old man finally turned his head, his pale eyes meeting Brody's for the first time. There was no anger in them, no fear. There was just a profound weariness, the look of a man who had seen empires rise and fall in the space of a single afternoon. "No, thank you, son," he said, his voice quiet and raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "I'm just watching." This quiet refusal was like fuel on Brody's egotistical fire. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Oh, I get it. Can't afford the $5, huh? Look, I'll tell you what." He pulled a crisp $50 bill from his wallet and slapped it on the counter. "I'll pay for your round. You hit 1 duck, just 1, and you can keep the change. You miss 'em all. You just have to admit that the new generation is better." His friends whooped and hollered, pulling out their phones to record the impending humiliation. The spectacle drew a small crowd, their faces lit by the garish blinking lights of the carnival games. The pressure was building, a suffocating bubble of public expectation. The old man sighed, a small, barely audible sound. It wasn't a sigh of defeat, but of resignation. He looked at the cheap, plastic-stocked air rifle chained to the counter, his gaze analytical. He looked at the smirking face of the boy in front of him. He seemed to be weighing something not in the present, but against a scale of past sacrifices and silent promises. David watched, his heart thumping against his ribs. He saw the subtle shift in the old man's stance. His feet, which had been planted casually, moved to shoulder-width apart. His back straightened, the slight stoop of age momentarily vanishing. His breathing, which had been shallow, deepened into a slow, rhythmic cadence. David knew that pattern. It was box breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. It was a technique used by operators to steady their heart rate and calm their nerves under extreme pressure. This was not a man preparing to shoot at tin ducks. This was a man preparing for a mission. The old man finally gave a single, curt nod. "All right," he said, his voice still quiet but now possessing a new edge, a sliver of tempered steel. Brody's grin widened. "That's the spirit? But let's make it interesting. My $50 against, well, your pride. And you have to do it blindfolded." The suggestion hung in the air, dripping with malice. A blindfold. It was the ultimate insult, turning the challenge from a test of skill into an act of pure mockery. The crowd murmured, a mix of shock and cruel anticipation. The carnival worker, a tired-looking man with a stained apron, hesitated. "I don't know about that, kid. Safety regulations." Brody cut him off, sliding another 20 across the counter. "For your trouble, just give him the blindfold." The old man didn't protest. He simply waited as the carnival worker, pocketing the 20, handed him a strip of cheap black cloth. As the man reached out to tie it, the old man held up a hand. "I'll do it." He took the cloth and, with slow, deliberate movements, folded it and tied it securely around his own eyes, plunging himself into darkness. David felt a chill run down his spine. The confidence, the utter lack of hesitation, was terrifying. Brody and his friends were snickering, convinced they were about to witness the funniest thing they'd ever seen. David knew they were about to witness a sermon, delivered not with words, but with 5 pellets of lead. The old man reached out his hands, not fumbling, but with a precise tactile grace. He found the air rifle, his fingers tracing its cheap lines. He brought the stock to his shoulder. It was a toy, a poorly balanced, inaccurate piece of junk. But in his hands, it seemed to settle, to find its purpose. The crowd fell silent. The only sounds were the distant screams from the roller coaster and the hum of the generator. The old man stood perfectly still for a count of 10. He wasn't aiming. He was listening. He was feeling the subtle vibrations of the ground, the faint whisper of air moving through the tent. He was building a map of the world in his mind, a world of sound and sensation. Then it began. There was no warning. His finger tightened on the trigger. Crack, the sound was sharp, definitive. A split second later, a loud pang echoed as the first metal duck spun violently on its hinge. Bullseye. A gasp went through the crowd. Brody's smirk faltered. The old man didn't move. He cycled the cheap pump-action mechanism of the rifle with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful. He adjusted his aim by a fraction of a millimeter, not by sight, but by an internal calculation David couldn't begin to comprehend. Crack. Pang. The second duck flipped over, another bullseye. The snickering from Brody's friends had stopped completely. Their phones were still recording, but their faces were now masks of disbelief. The old man was a statue, a monument to impossible focus. He was no longer in the noisy, greasy world of the county fair. He was somewhere else, a place of silent, lethal precision. A brief, fractured memory flashed through his mind. The scent of jungle rot and cordite, the weight of a different rifle in his hands, the voice of his spotter whispering ranges in his ear through a crackling radio. Crack, pang, the third duck, perfect center. Brody's face had gone pale. The $50 bill on the counter seemed to mock him. This wasn't happening. It was a trick, a lucky streak. It had to be. David watched, mesmerized. He wasn't just seeing a man shoot. He was seeing a lifetime of discipline, of training so rigorous and demanding it had been burned into the man's very soul. The tremor in his hand was gone, subsumed by a will of iron. The cheap rifle was no longer a toy. It was an extension of that will. The old man's shoulders were relaxed, his breathing even. He was a master at work, and the shooting gallery was his canvas. He made his final 2 adjustments, movements so small they were almost invisible. The crowd held a collective breath. The air was thick with tension. Crack pang. The 4th duck vanished. Dead center. Brody looked like he was going to be sick. His bravado had evaporated, leaving behind the hollow shell of a humiliated boy. 1 shot left. The old man took one final slow breath. He held it. The world seemed to stop. For him there was only the rifle, the trigger, and the memory of a target half a world away. Crack. The final shot was louder than the others, it seemed. It was followed by the loudest pang of all. The 5th duck didn't just spin. It flew off its hinge entirely, clattering to the floor behind the gallery wall. 5 shots. 5 bullseyes, blindfolded. A wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd, followed by a sudden explosive burst of applause and cheers. The old man slowly, deliberately untied the blindfold. His expression was exactly the same as before. Calm, distant, weary. He placed the rifle back on the counter with a soft click. He didn't look at the cheering crowd. He didn't look at the pile of defeated tin ducks. He didn't even glance at the $50 bill. He simply turned to Brody, whose face was a mixture of shame and utter bewilderment. The old man's pale blue eyes held no triumph, no, "I told you so." There was only a quiet, profound sadness in them. He gave a slight nod, a gesture that was neither forgiving nor condemning, and began to walk away, melting back into the river of people flowing through the fairgrounds. The $50 bill lay on the counter, a testament to a lesson bought and paid for. Brody stared after him, his mouth hanging open, the laughter of his friends now a distant, hollow echo. He had tried to humiliate an old man, and had instead been handed a devastating education in the difference between arrogance and true power. But the story wasn't over. As the old man moved through the crowd, a figure stepped into his path, deliberately blocking his way. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a sharply tailored gray suit that looked out of place amidst the cotton candy and sawdust. He was flanked by 2 younger men, with the unmistakable posture and alert eyes of professional security. The man in the suit looked at the old man, his expression one of intense, respectful scrutiny. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice calm and authoritative. "That was some of the finest shooting I have ever seen." The old man just nodded, preparing to step around him. The man in the suit didn't move. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the old man's face. Really looked. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition crossed his features. "My God," he whispered, his voice suddenly filled with awe. "It is you, Sergeant Major Cole?" The name meant nothing to the people nearby who had paused to watch this new development. But to David, who had moved closer, the name combined with the rank was like a lightning strike. There was only one Sergeant Major Cole spoken of in the hushed, reverent tones of Special Operations lore. A man who was more myth than man. A ghost who had written the book on marksmanship for the country's most elite units before disappearing into civilian life. The old man, Sergeant Major Cole, finally showed a flicker of emotion. A deep sigh escaped his lips. His shoulders slumped just a little. The cloak of anonymity he had worn for decades was slipping. "You have me mistaken for someone else," he said, his voice low. The man in the suit shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. "No, sir, I don't. I was a young captain at Fort Bragg. You ran a 3-day advanced marksmanship course for our detachment. You taught us to shoot in the dark, by sound. You said the eyes were a distraction." He gestured back toward the shooting gallery. I see you haven't lost your touch." He then turned to the stunned crowd, and particularly to the pale, trembling Brody. "Let me tell you who you just challenged," the man said, his voice rising, clear and strong, cutting through the fairground noise. "This is Sergeant Major Samuel Cole. He served this country for 30 years in places you've never heard of, on missions that will never be declassified. The medals he was awarded are locked in a vault because the operations they were for are still state secrets. He didn't just serve, he taught. He trained the men who stand on the wall and guard this nation while you sleep. The men of Delta Force of SEAL Team 6, they learned from him. He is a living legend. And you challenged him to a game of tin ducks." The man in the suit turned back to Cole. His entire demeanor changed. The powerful civilian vanished, replaced by the young captain at Fort Bragg. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. "It is an honor to see you again, Sergeant Major," he said, his voice thick with emotion. From the edge of the crowd, David straightened his own back. He too came to attention, his body remembering its old rhythms. He rendered a salute of his own, a silent tribute from one generation of warrior to another. The tired-looking carnival worker, seeing the salutes, slowly took off his greasy baseball cap and placed it over his heart. He'd seen enough in his own time to know when he was in the presence of greatness. Sergeant Major Cole looked at the men saluting him, a lifetime of memories flooding his pale blue eyes. He didn't return the salute. Instead, he reached out and gently touched the suited man's arm, a gesture that said, "At ease, son." He then looked over at Brody, who looked as if the ground had been ripped out from under him. The boy took a stumbling step forward. "Sir," he stammered, his face burning with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was an idiot." Cole looked at the boy, and for the first time, a faint, sad smile touched his lips. He walked over and placed a weathered hand on Brody's shoulder. "We're all idiots sometimes, son," he said, his voice kind. "The important thing is to learn from it. Respect isn't loud, it's quiet, remember that." With a final nod, he turned and walked away, the man in the suit and his security detail falling into step behind him, forming a silent honor guard as he disappeared once more into the anonymous crowd, leaving behind a silenced boy, a lesson learned, and the lingering echo of 5 perfect shots in the gathering twilight.